Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and hello everybody. My name is Amir and today I would like to talk about the economic implications of the of the blockade over the Persian Gulf, or rather the appearance of a blockade. The US has been ineffective in maintaining its portion since it has too few ships and those ships are patrolling far south in the Indian Ocean. In Iran's case, it has merely leveled what it calls a fee, which must be paid to the Persian Gulf Strait Authority, a recently created body aimed at managing the Straits of Hormuz. The money from these fees is most definitely going to go into repairing the Iranian economy and quite likely buoying the Iranian currency, the which has which had recently seen a drastic inflationary spike in December 2025. However, due to the due to the scale of the destruction across the GCC, there have been shortages in oil, natural gas, sulfur, helium, and fertilizers that come from natural gas. Therefore, we are therefore it is almost certain, at least in my opinion, that a depression is inbound. Within this summer and autumn, we shall see the full effects of it all the way in the Americas. The effects are currently being felt in places far closer, such as the ASEAN countries and Australia, which have had to restrict their fuel consumption. But this does not mean that the effects have simply not arrived in the US. Already, Carl Zar reported how US farm bankruptcy rates are up 45%, and that 75% of all US farmers report that they cannot afford the increased prices of fertilizer and diesel. He also notes that the that the booms in the US stock market are no different from the dot-com bubble, which was something he witnessed firsthand in the US. Therefore, I would like to pose that the depression have a name, and in this case it is what it is and in this case it should I propose it be called the oil depression. Oil, something that comes from Major Scott Richter's definition of the US invading Iraq. Oil in this case will refer to oil, Israel, and land. Only this time, land will refer to cultivatable land and not necessarily the US bases, which of course are also in short supply. Therefore, this oil depression is likely going to be, therefore, this oil depression is going to be, is likely going to affect the entire world. And its effects will last for years, given how, for instance, in Qatar, the oil wells have been damaged, and that damage could take 5 to 7 years to rebuild. And Kuwait, as has been referred constantly, has not exported a single barrel of oil since April this year. Iran cannot make up the shortfall, and it would take apparently 2.5 Russias to make up for the gas shortage. Therefore, the world will be in quite the it will be in economic dire straits. It will be lacking critical resources for the most basic functioning. But there is also something else. There will have to be a new method of oil price control because the GCC and as a result OPEC has been rendered ineffective. The UAE has sought to break away, the UAE has actually broken away from OPEC in an effort to sell oil at the market price, aiming to restore what little of an economy it can. However, the rest of OPEC, that leaves the rest of OPEC. What will Saudi Arabia do? What would cut what would what would Saudi Arabia do given that it can supply some portions of the world's oil via its westernmost terminals that empty out into the Red Sea? I suppose that there could be a deal worked out between Russia and Saudi Arabia when it comes to oil price controls, but will there be one that involves the US? That is quite the intriguing question. The US most definitely would want to have high oil prices to maintain its own domestic fracking industry, which itself is very price which is very costly to operate. And it should not be forgotten that the US is a net importer of oil. It imports 6 million barrels but exports 3 million. Therefore, and it has not restored its reserves ever since the previous Biden administration. Therefore, the US will likely be experiencing fuel shortages of its own. So what does that leave? What does that leave? What does that leave the rest of the world with? High prices of oil, and that cannot be controlled easily by an organization that possibly might not exist in the near future, OPEC, thus leaving OPEC Plus to pick up the pieces. How it will do that is quite possible. How it will do that is a question that will be answered in due time. What will China's role be as the largest consumer of hydrocarbons is also an important question. This will likely be China's first foray into controlling the price of oil if it attempts to do so. So it is possible that it, along with Russia and Iran, via BRICS possibly, could come to an arrangement in controlling the price of oil. I'd like to hear from you what you think about this, and if anyone has any ideas, because I have not seen anyone wonder about what the mechanisms for the control of the price of oil will be. It is a question that has not been asked even this week, and I would like to hear from you what the possible answers would be. Additionally, there has been an important development. Starobelsk College in Luhansk Oblast was recently attacked, resulting in the death of 21 college students. Russia has responded by launching Oreshniks, or rather by launching strikes, including the third Oreshnik, which has already which has claimed two targets, and in this latest strike claimed a third target, an underground drone factory. All this is happening in the midst of increasing Russian gains in Sumy, Kharkov, and Zaporozhye oblasts, and the US withdrawal from both Southwest Asia is being further exacerbated by US withdrawals from Germany. But the addition of a brigade in Poland, which is possibly for domestic consumption, is unlikely to change the balance of power. And that balance of power is rapidly shifting towards the east and away from the west. What does this mean in totality? The obvious answer is that the West has been defeated. Another important answer is that Western imperialism is on its last legs. The world has already taken note and harshly reacted, even in the West, to the Palestinian Holocaust, and it has seen the dwindling of US power. It has seen the economic it has seen the economic dis, the economic devolution of the EU, and how it is rapidly gearing up for war in the east against Russia, but with no resources, no industry, and an increasingly impoverished population that is turning against its own governments, which could result in them forced into choosing between the EU and their own and their own domestic power. What would that mean? What would that mean? The EU itself is a very recent political construct, so it is quite likely that it will not see the it will likely not survive into the 2050s. But what would it mean what would it do in the meantime? Quite possibly not much. Politically, it is an invalid. It is unable to govern even it is unable to maintain even a competent military footing or an adequate economic footing that would see its economies at least somewhat recover. Instead, it has provoked Russia into depriving itself from Russian gas supplies, and it has provoked China. It has provoked China as well, which means that it has become effectively a captive market of the West, a place where the US can dump its very expensive fuels into a place where it can absorb expensive US fuels, a place which can absorb what little US military produce that currently exists. I would also like to add that the economies of Russia and China are also in a much better condition than has been reported in the West. Russia continues to have a far more balanced economy than the rest of the EU, hence why it is the leading economy in Europe, and hence why it is the leading economy in Europe. Meanwhile, in China, its economy continues to boom, whilst not at the previously record-breaking 10% of GDP per year, its 5% per GDP is still impressive. Its its population continues to its population continues to become more and more educated in the STEM fields, and its statesmen continue to wield diplomacy in an artful way, securing cooperative arrangements with cooperative arrangements that are both beneficial to itself and beneficial to other countries. A win-win policy that is not observed in the West. Such win-win policies are obvious when viewing China-Russia relations, China-Iran relations, or even China-Iraq relations, wherein it has a special oil for schools program where the Iraqi government sells its oil to China, once again via the Persian Gulf mainly, as China repays through schools that are most desperately needed for reinvigorating the Iraqi economy. As you can see from these examples, it is Eurasia that is growing. However, that does not mean that everything is proceeding smoothly. Recently, the new development bank has been has been instructed to issue reforms, since it still has over 30% since 30% of its transactions are still dollar based, and BRICS itself remains divided due to the UAE and India's policies. The UAE remains aggressive towards Iran, even though it does not have a military competent to even defend its borders. And India started out the second imposed, or rather started out just before the second imposed war, with a visit to Israel, which has been touted as quite embarrassing. India and the UAE therefore will have to make a choice. Is it truly that they want to stay in BRICS as spoilers, or are they doing so for their own benefit? Unlike the UAE, India initially joined and was a trailblazer in BRICS under Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. He proposed that India join BRICS as it would allow India to maintain a far more independent economic policy, and it would allow India to diversify its trade away from the US, therefore reducing the political contributions of India's oligarchy. However, under the present administration of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, things have shifted greatly. India has shifted significantly towards the West. It has it has embraced anti-China policies, and it has only recently looked to modestly walk those back, but it has made no significant ground in the department of BRICS, and this was shown in the most recent BRICS summit, where which was held in New Delhi. I would like to end this program by asking I would like to end this program by asking this simple question of how would how should rather economies better handle the upcoming oil depression. There will be no there will be there will be a shortage of key supplies. In some countries there might not be any supplies at all. What little is floating around in tankers will eventually end, and the world and many countries will have to turn to their own domestic supplies. But what would it mean for economic management? For instance, can the can Western countries truly turn back to their old welfare state models? Not the welfare state models of the post Second World War, but during the Great Depression, and countries were obliged to, or to whatever degree they could, support working programs or support employment programs or fund key industries that were necessary for the national economy, even if they did not produce a profit. What would it what would it mean for ideas such as socialism in the West? Would there be a proliferation, or would the West continue to operate under its current uh, under its current oligarchic systems that have brought this ruin in the first place? And what about the modification? And what about similar economic systems in Eurasia? Would the governments there tilt more towards socialist policies? Would there be greater government intervention in the economy? For instance, would there be more capital controls rather, to contain currency inflation? Or would there be more of a or would there be a more moderate approach whereby it would be the government that would assist in key infrastructure projects and protecting key jobs, but the private sector would continue to operate as is? As always, I would like to hear your comment. I would like to hear you. I would like to hear you, and I look forward to your comments. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.